Okay, today we are talking about, at least in theory, the Halacha and Simtzari Beis, Halacha Hein Roman Zayin, which is about Tipas Cholov. We're going to focus on steam systems. So let me first talk for a minute about steam systems. For you, at least, Yossi, you know what I'm talking about. But just to set us up with the issue we have to deal with, and we'll see how it connects to this din, and at least marginally. Okay. People who, in big manufacturing companies, there's no little fires on the pots. It's not like in your house that you have a little fire there, but rather it's considered efficient there's one boiler, it makes steam, and the steam goes all around the factory. Okay. There are some places where the steam actually cooks the food directly. That's not our question for today. That's not what we're going to deal with. Rather, what we think about is for when it's, for example, in a jacket, okay? Which is to say, you have a kettle, and the kettle has a double wall to it. The food is sitting in the middle of the kettle, and steam comes into that jacket. That's the space between the part that touches the food and the outside, and the steam comes into there, and that steam is what cooks the food. Okay. Once the steam has done its job, it condenses, it turns back into water, and it comes out the bottom as condensate. Okay. Now it's steam, it's condensed water. Okay. And to understand what just happened is really to understand why they're using steam in the first place. Why they're using, what's the advantage of using steam? The steam has, this is an important principle about steam, and that is that steam is not just water that's got to 212 degrees. To get water to 212 degrees, you have to heat it up. It's called sensible heat. You have to get it to that hot. Every bit of energy you put into it makes it a little hotter. But once it gets to 212 degrees, to get it from 212 degrees water to 212 degrees steam, take something called latent energy, latent heat, and that is you have to add in be'erach another 1,000 degrees worth of heat to make it go from 212 degrees water to 212 degrees steam. That latent heat, that extra bit that you have, that extra huge amount that you have to add in,
1,000 degrees
of energy, okay, what we call BTUs of energy. I mean, to get the water from 210, 211 took 1 degree of energy, and 211 to 212 took another one. To go from 212 water to 212 steam takes 970 more. Okay, and that extra is like latent, like it's bekayach, and it's very waiting to get out. It's very easy to give that energy back. Okay, it's not easy to give back from 210 to 209 degrees. It's hard to transfer that heat to somebody else. But to go from steam to water, it very easily transfers that extra energy. The extra latent energy transfers very easily. So when the steam hits this kettle over here, when we see the steam hitting the kettle, right away the extra 1,000 degrees worth of energy goes into the food. And the water, it's say 212 degrees, maybe it's 211 degrees. A drop of its own heat doesn't give up. But what it's really giving up is that 1,000 degrees that in a second it gives up very quickly.
How could that be measured?
How could what be measured?
This energy, this latent heat that's there, that's obviously, how is it measured?
Because if you boil up water, you can measure how much heat you're putting in, and you see, okay, if the 1 second it got to this many degrees, and 2 seconds, and 3 seconds, and how many, and then all of a sudden it hits water and it stops getting hotter. It doesn't turn to steam. You wait and you wait and you wait until you get all this extra energy until it becomes steam.
Once it's in the steam already, how do you measure steam that, let's say, it has already 500 degrees and only has 500 to go?
So
and it has 750.
So these are chart. No, there's no in between.
Way to measure it.
Okay, maybe, but there's no in betweens. Once it gives up any of that latent heat, it turns back into condensate. It basically gives it all very quickly, and then it plops and it condenses into water.
I just want to know. This should be able to. It's not so baruchnius that it can't be measured, right? It's not measured the temperature. The temperature is the same.
Right.
So how is it measured? How is this?
I don't know. Okay, I don't know. But now, part of the issue, and I'm mentioning this because it's going to get to us later. Part of the issue is that this latent heat, which is so easy to give up, means is that as the steam travels through the factory, it's also going to give up some of that energy into the piping and all kinds of things as it moves along. That's considered very dangerous for factories. It's not good to have water in the steam pipes. You don't want any condensation to be in the steam pipes. So they do all kinds of, they have separators and drip pockets and filters, all kinds of things to make sure there's no water in the piping.
Okay. Any energy that gives up automatically condensates?
Well, it gives up, then that amount of the water of the vapor will turn back into water.
Because there's so much potential in there, so is it possible that some of it gives up?
So
hotter than...
But there will be some drops of water.
Some drops of water. Have to be any.
because there's enough energy to turn 99% of the water into steam.
Right.
There's not enough to turn the last 1% into steam. So that 1% stays as water. If there'd be enough energy, they would all be steam. So no, it lost some of it. Some of it came into the piping and to things around it. So it lost it. So the companies the people who build the steam system put all kinds of efforts to make sure there's no liquid in the piping. Okay, if you were to look at, if you stick something into the pipe, of course it'll condense right into that cold thing you put into it. But if the pipe was glass, like when I learned about steam systems at a company, they had built a factory that was made out of glass. Okay, the whole steam system, not all, almost the whole steam system was made out of glass. And when you look at it, there was nothing. It was empty inside because there was no liquid. Okay, because that's the point. It wasn't just for show, because that's an important thing. Because if there's water inside there, they explain to.
But there's really water molecules in there.
There was really vapor, right? There were vapor molecules, but nothing that you could see.
You couldn't see vapor molecules.
You can't see vapor. No, when you see steam coming out of your spaghetti, that's because it's condensing up in the air. Little bits of it are condensing. It looks like a cloud, but that's it's invisible. No. Okay. But over here, once it hits the kettle, then the packet does condense. It drains out. And then that's its own thing. We'll talk about a different time. How do they keep that? Okay, that's a different. Okay, I'm not going to say it. Okay, so what happens is, so now when you have when this happens, so this is how you cook the food. Okay, this is like a typical setup for how you cook the food. The steam comes into the kettle, gives off all this energy quickly into the food. That's why I'll mention sorry, it's not relevant to us today. That's the reason why when you want to cook something that's more delicate, you don't cook it with steam. Like you want to pasteurize milk. You don't pasteurize milk with steam, because if you use steam is so strong, it's so hard to control, and you would overheat your milk. Okay, if you're trying to cook your milk, you'd overheat it and ruin the taste of it. So you want to cook ketchup, so steam is a great thing to cook with, because the steam cooks it up really quickly. It's really fast and it's really strong. It's great. It's good for cooking up ketchup. You want to cook milk, it's too dangerous, too strong, and it would burn you. Volatile, okay, good word. So instead you use water. You use the steam to heat up water, and then the water heats up, cooks your ketchup, cooks your milk. Okay, so here we have, after you cook this food, the condensate that comes out, I just explained to you, comes out at the Aruch 212 degrees, okay, or it's under pressure now, probably comes at more than 212 degrees. Okay, it's very hot water. So not only is it hot water, but the chemicals that are used in the boiler, all kinds of reasons why they need chemicals in the boiler, they already put those chemicals into this water. So it's a waste for that water to go to the drain. Why would you let that water drain out? You have hot water already. So we're going to need hot water in a second to make more steam, to cook the other things in the factory. So that condensate, commonly, is sent back to the boiler, and they reuse it again, because we have this very hot water that it needs a lot of energy to turn it back into steam, but it's better than starting with cold water. Why would we start with cold water? So instead we start with the hot water, and they want to save that condensate. It's water that's clean, it's water that's added chemicals to it, and it's water that's very hot. So the companies would like to, the standard thing is you want to return it, you take it back to the boiler. Okay? So, over here I'm going to show you, this is a simplified steam system. Okay? Simplified. You have a boiler, okay, that's the red thing in the middle there, the boiler, and it's sending steam to heat a kosher kettle and a not kosher kettle. Okay, food is being cooked in a kosher kettle and a non-kosher kettle. Condensate from those two kettles is going back to a condensate return tank, a collection tank. Into that tank, they add in fresh water and boil chemicals, and then it goes back to the boiler. Okay, so this is a simple, would be a system where we're here. This is the shiloh we're going to talk about, which is I'm going to break it down into three questions that we have to talk about. Okay, so this is our system. The same steam is heating up kosher and non-kosher in their jacketed kettles. And the condensate from both of them is coming, eventually making its way back to the boiler. Okay? So we have three questions. First question is, does condensate carry non-kosher blios? Can the condensate become treif at all? Question number two. Do those blios, okay, let's say the condensate is treif. Do those blios make the kosher food treif? Can it affect the kosher food? Okay, let's say the condensate is treif, but does that make a difference in the kosher food? And if the answer to both of those is yes, then our third question is, what do we do about that? What can we do to stop that from happening? In the same company making kosher or non-kosher, so assuming that the condensate just becomes treif, and assuming that the treif condensate can affect the kosher food, is there anything we can do about that to avoid that kind of a problem? Okay, those are our three questions we're going to talk about. Okay, so now we talk about our halacha. Okay. Our halacha we're talking about is טיפת. which is it's halacha in Sim Tzadi Beis, and people who are learning they wonder when there will ever be a gay shayla. For us, it's a gay all the time. Okay, it's a din that what happens if food spritzes milk, drips onto the outside of a pot, and then there is or is not shishim against what's in the pot. In what cases does the food become treif or does not become treif? Okay, and it's of course, and I guess it happens in the house. I guess it could happen, but it seems like a very far-fetched case. But and there's all kinds of the machlokas shonim about if bleed transfers through, when bleed transfers through. But in concept, there's such a thing as bleed transferring through. We're going to talk about today if that's true for a steam system. We're also going to mention in passing for hot water system, same type of a shaila, where hot water is heating the thing instead of steam. One day in the future, Mitzvah Shem, I'll talk to you about cooling tunnels, and tunnel pasteurizer, which also negate the same shaila. Today we'll focus on steam systems. Okay, so a question like this. I told you that the steam is invisible. If you look in the steam pipe, there's nothing in there. It's completely, if you looked at it and you weren't so smart to know that this is a steam pipe, it looks like an empty pipe. Again, as soon as you open it up, there would be condensation. But really, there's nothing inside there. So the question is there, the din of טיפת חלב is all by things that are, you can see, that are physical. Okay, is there such a thing as blia going into the steam? That's our first question. Can there be blias into the steam? Okay, so that's a question. I don't know the answer to that question. Well, I'm not sure I know the answer to that question, but it's not relevant to us. Okay, and the reason why it's not that part, at least that part of the question is not relevant to us, is because I told you as soon as the steam hits the kettle, it condenses. So when the steam hit the treif kettle, when it came to the treif kettle, it turned into a liquid. So there isn't invisible steam on the other side of the kettle. In the yellow kettle over there that's cooking chazer, there isn't invisible steam in the jacket. No. There's condensation in the jacket. In the piping, there was invisible steam. But in the jacket of the kettle, there is liquid over there. So of course, blia goes through. That's our טיפת חלב. The blia that's inside the pot transfers through the metal to the other side to the liquid, the condensation of the pot. So we don't have to think about whether is there blia in the invisible steam. Not relevant to us because there's liquid on the other side of the kettle. So it's partial that there's a blia going to. I should say it's partial. It's an example of טיפת חלב of time going into there. Okay. Now.
Yeah, but it's not going to affect the kosher though.
So far we did just our first question. Okay, the condensate becomes non-kosher. The condensate becomes non-kosher because the talent transfers into a liquid, not into steam. It's transferred into a liquid that's in the condensation, and it makes the condensation treif. So the condensate coming from our yellow kettle, from the treif kettle back to the boiler, that condensate. That's why our first question is that treif? Yes, טיפת חלב tells us that is treif. Okay. Now, what about our second question? What about could those blias get to the kettle? Now, for the blias to get from the boiler to the kosher kettle, now it has to become invisible. Now it in fact goes through being an invisible pipe. It goes through in the pipe where it turns into steam where there's nothing. Again, it's an empty pipe. So now does the blia transfer from the treif condensate went into the boiler and it was treif, but now there's an empty. What appears to be an empty pipe going from the boiler to the kettle. So now there's liquid again at the kettle, but in between there was nothing. There was emptiness in between there. So can the blias is there anything there? Okay. So the truth is that what I just described to you is a variation of a well-known tshuva in the Rivash, brought in Shulchan Aruch. We spoke about it by alcoholic beverages, who was asked about distillation, which Kineret was a new thing in his time. What's distillation? Distillation is you make, the case he talked about, is you take wine and you essentially boil the wine at a temperature where the alcohol boils out and the water stays behind. The alcohol boils out, and now you catch that alcohol and you turn it back into a liquid. So the alcohol when it boils out, now it's more concentrated because you left a lot of the water behind. So instead of being 12% wine, all of a sudden you have 40% brandy. And the shayla the answer was, is that usher or not? They said, is it usher because it came from the wine, or is it mutter because it's invisible? Because when you go in the in-between, between the place where you boil it up, when you turn it back into a liquid, it's again the same thing, an empty pipe. That's our shayla. There's a big empty pipe there that has nothing inside of it. So we all know that the brandy comes from the wine, but the in between this emptiness, again, does that carry time to it? And the Rivash brought rayas that in fact that's awesome, and that at least in our case. We've talked at other times about what other cases, but in our case, where there's a very clear connection, a clear link between the liquid at the beginning and the liquid at the end, then for sure in those cases we consider it to be treif. I mean, in our case, in the case of Rivash, the wine that you start with and the brandy that you end with are clearly connected to each other. As you boil up the wine, you see more and more brandy coming on the other side. If you taste this one, it tastes like that one. There's a clear connection between one and the other one. So the Rivash says in that case, the tam that brandy is considered asur. It's tam yayin and it's asur. In our case, the same thing. As the boiler goes on, the more the boiler works, do you see the condensation forming and cooking up the ketchup and the kosher kettle? So in that case, we say that it carries the tam. Okay, so the answer to our second question is yes, it affects the treif condensation affects the food in the kosher kettle, because even though it went through, so to speak, an invisible pipe, there was nothing in the pipe there, even so it's obvious that the condensation happening by the kosher kettle is coming from the boiler, that there's a connection between them, and therefore it carries the tam.
So had there been zayah, visible zayah, he wouldn't have asked the child.
No question at all. Right, because then it would be liquid. I say, hey, there's liquid over here. So of course liquid carries tam. Why shouldn't it carry tam?
How did they know? They also had glass then, and they saw there was how did they know it was invisible?
How did they know? I don't.
There's no vapor you can see.
I don't know. I don't know the answer. It happens to be that people who make wine use glass. I don't know if in times of Rivash they did that. People who do this, that's like a way to. I'm not sure. I don't know. Okay, but the Rivash brings right is that when it's done with heat and when there's a direct connection between one and the other, and when you see the link, it's obvious to you that one leads to the other one. Then even though it's invisible in the middle and invisible things are nasser, even so, that's what. In other words, we don't say that the rain that came down yesterday was treif because it was it evaporated, because no one sees any connection between yesterday's evaporation and today's rain. There's no shaykhs. Even in theory we know that, but
that's whole premium others.
Right, it's a new thing. Even though we all know that this is the same water that other Rishon drank from also. You know what I mean? It's been used 1,000 times, but thus it's new. But not in this kind of a case where there's an obvious connection between them. Then he says, but also because it's hot there, it's cold, but whatever. But here, because it's hot and because it's direct connection, so we say it's also. Okay. So now we're not going to answer our third question yet. Okay, we'll hold that because now we have to stop for a second and say. So now we just said the dinim of tipas chol tell us that there's tam transits through the wall of the kli, and even though there's these vapors in between, we don't have to worry about that. And tam transits, wonderful. So again, from we saw the din, everything is fine. The problem is that in short, I'm going to tell you a little longer, but in short. No one ever sees tam transfer. Okay, so we have a din that tells us that tipas chol that tam transfers through the kli, but in practice, nobody ever sees it. Okay, the people who make equipment, the people who work with these kind of things, like the scientific type people will tell you, the manufacturing people say, unless there's a leak, they'll say there's nothing going to be tam, not going to be any tam there. Okay, that's fine. But also we had mashgichim. We'll find out later. Mashgichim who have to taste this water, the water on the other side of the thing. And they don't taste anything, okay? Let me say it like this, okay? Rosh Hashanah said like this. He says, we never heard, okay, no one ever tasted meat in their apples, or tam shel dag b'chol, or the fish taste in their milk. I mean, the same equipment was used, the same steam system used to cook many different things. No one ever tasted them. He said, "Pshutai, banan tzaddik ain't kanatzinas. Tam is ivashi." He says, we could sit and theorize. What's the reason? Maybe it's because it's stainless steel. Maybe because it's cast iron. Maybe because it's no microscopic holes like they used to have. Maybe because they filter the steam. There could be we could come up with all kinds of theories. He says, but in Lamaisa, no one ever sees that. No one ever tastes anything like that. Okay. I'll tell you, I'm going to come to it in a second. Ravelsky said, he says, did anybody ever open up a can of corn and tasted carrots inside of it? Did Tom ever taste it? We don't see any Tom. He says, so what do we do with that? So the truth is, this kind of a shaila, there's a Jewish Rama about this, okay? Of course not about the steam system, but it was Rama about this. And the case of the Rama was that they...
Indeed, it's machlokes Rishonim, right? Aren't some Rishonim say that Tom does not go through?
Yes. But the Shulchan Aruch says we should be machmir that Tom does go through. But we're assuming that Tom goes through. But, so but so we're not trying to say Tom doesn't go through, but in our situation, we never saw in these kind of steam systems that happened like that. Okay, so the case of the Ramah was,
Is that sheet brought in Shulchan Aruch?
no, it's not important to all. Yeah, Torah basis, of course, there's a lot, many sheets about it, yes. The Ramah's case was they had barrels that had in it olive oil, okay, and the rumor was that these barrels were smeared with pig fat, okay, and therefore people didn't want to eat from it. And this, if you look in Sarm, every couple hundred years, the same shadow comes up again, that the olive oil barrels are smeared with pig fat. The oil barrels, the barrels that they put the olive oil into, that they transfer from here to there, were smeared with pig fat for whatever reason. And the Rambam says like this. He says, "Sharoiv kusim taimim v'savor magishim by tam chazer." He says the goyim who taste it, where people are being apprehensive to eat it, but the goyim taste it, they don't taste anything. And he says, "Benir didon she'anu batzmeinu ta'amnu so come upon him. We've all tasted olive oil. Lo ta'amnu by klum like lemechesh kal." He says, we don't see any time. There's nothing to do. Now the Ramah then I didn't put all these words onto the screen, but the Ramah puts into makes it more halachic. He says, maybe the amount of tender is batal, maybe it's a sound of gam. He starts imagining halachic reasons why there should be no tam. But that's the second half of what he has to say. What's driving him is that we tried it a million times. No one ever tasted the other food in it, so obviously it's not there. So now we can start, looking through, turning the pages in your day to find that an excuse, so to speak, for it. But what's driving him is that no one sees it. So we're just along the lines of Rosh Hashanah saying is that, listen, Rosh said, I didn't put you the words of Rosh Hashanah either. He started giving all these theories about what might happen, why it might not be tam. He says, but Lamaisa, no one ever sees the tam. Okay, so what do we do with that? What do we do when we have here the din tells us that tam goes through, and we have these Lamaisa, we're not seeing any tam. So it turns out that not this Ramah is telling us one side, but really there's precedent the other direction, actually from the Ramah also, and that is like this. There was a question about whether there's blia into glass. Okay, so most Rishonim looked at it and they said Lamaisa is everyone knows that glass has no blia. So when you cook food in a glass, you use a glass for hot for one thing, you don't taste it in the next food. So they said it's smooth and it's hard. However, the words that they use, and they said there's no blias into glass. That's it. There are no blias in glass. You could use glass for kasher and tray for milk and flesh. It makes a difference. You can do whatever you want to there. And some Rishonim say, and that's what the Ramah says, that no, we have to be machmir. It has some connections to cheres. The way it's made is similar to cheres. So therefore, we're machmir and assume that there's time into it. I mean to say is, Lamaisa is no one tastes anything. No one ever uses it. We all know in labs they use glass because it doesn't have any blias, so to speak, into it, no carryover. And people all know that is, and the Rishonim saw that. It wasn't not us who was seeing it, the Rishonim who saw that. But even so, we were like more cautious and said, who knows, maybe there are blias, and actually gave it a strict thing because it has a similar to cheres. And similar to that is, what I told you before for Rabelski was actually a shiloh that he asked to Moshe. Okay? Rabelski, one day when I was working at the OU, walk into my office, and there sitting on my desk is this handwritten shiloh, 5 shilohs handwritten, and it was obviously Rebelski's handwriting, written to Moshe. I to this day still don't know who left that for me. Someone just left it on my desk. 5 shilohs that Rebelski wrote to Moshe. Some of them, if you look at Igros Moshe, you see the tshuvas to them. It doesn't say it's Rebelski, but 5 of them you could see that it's obviously answering this question. But this one that I'm going to tell you is not answered in Igros Moshe. And Rebelski, among the things he wrote, he says he was a chush meid. He said, "Shemi olam lo yotze shum tam mekan chosim kin in quotation marks mekan chosim afil de mayim koshken de zeh." He says it never happened that people opened up a can of one food and they tasted another food in it. He says, as Rabowski said, so let's go ahead and let's have. He said, and if you want to make it more official, we can have an official tastings. Have goyim taste lots of food, and have even yidden taste foods that we know are kosher. In the same factory, they made peas and carrots. So taste the peas and see if they taste like carrots, or carrots taste like peas. We could do our own tests and see it a million times, and it should be mutter. So I went to Rabowski and said, Rabowski, good shiloh. I said, so what's the answer? What answer to some of the other ones again? In Igros Moshe, you could find the answer to some of his shilohs. So he said, no, Moshe didn't write a tshuva for this one. But Moshe told him basically is that just because we have all kinds of proofs, we can't just throw out this whole thing. Okay? We can't just, there's a din Shulchan Aruch טיפת the our din that we're doing here, and we can't just throw it out just because it doesn't look right to us, it doesn't seem right. Okay? So these two examples, the glass and this thing that Rebelski is from Moshe, are sort of to me are telling us that when we have a very specific case, like the barrels of oil that have chazer in it, when you have a very specific case, it's one thing to say we have so much experience, we know that there's no time on this thing. Okay? But when we want to take it and just make a general rule, we're going to throw out the whole, glass is never going to be Belair, or say a steam system is no טיפת חלב in the steam system, that was too broad, and somehow we're too scared or too not confident to just throw it out and say, we didn't taste anything, so therefore there's no time to it. Okay? So there's this like tension, and we're leaning in the direction of saying is that, you know what, we don't see any time, we have no reason to think there is, but even so, we're not throwing it in now.
Pashas, the way to understand this is that before, in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Shulchan Aruch, you could always do tima.
Yes.
Right? At the time you have to do tima, the end result would be that this thing's would be mutter. Because you can actually get somebody, we tell you, it would be no time, and mutter. If you did it 500 times, and there was never any time, it would be chazaka, and then finish, it would become mutter. Once we get the Ramah said our minig is we don't do tima, so this is all rolled into that minig.
There's part of it. You see, part of not doing te'ima, you see, if we don't do te'ima, even if it's for one piece of chicken, I can't do te'ima to see if it tastes like milk. So koshkan, I can't do te'ima to throw out to make a whole rule out of something. Oh no, it's a similar idea.
It remains awesome time minig. That's the way.
So part of not doing te'ima is this kind of thing also.
Right.
Okay, maybe. Okay, I guess you could say.
But then how do you say Lamaisa this was mutter? These barrels were mutter?
Yeah. So
I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it came to be mad to that.
Right.
That
okay.
came, you know.
Well, maybe the opposite is right because everybody was eating the oil. You saying it's a minig to not something te'ima. Everyone was eating the oil, and people were complaining and said, "What's going on here? We hear these rumors that there's chazer in them." You know. So I'm not sure. Okay. Now,
is there any application on Halacha today's day and age?
Of this thing with oil? Well, you know the shot come all the time about olive oil. That people say that olive oil is diluted and fake and all kinds of shapes, things like that. That's an extension of the same Ramos. Anyhow. So the Lamaisa or reputable hashgachas take that position that time transfers through in the steam system, and you have to worry about Blios going through into the steam, into the condensate, and then back into the kosher food afterwards. But Lamaisa, knowing all that I've told you until now, that Lamaisa no one sees any time and all kinds of things like that, so they, and no one, like you said, Justin, that's a machlokes rishonim in the first place to start with, so they take certain kulas, okay? Like, for example, the other time we spoke about Hanan, then I'm not putting a Hanan for steam systems, okay? I'm not putting on a Hanan for steam systems, that's what we're talking about Hanan, okay? Then I'm not putting, they say, come on, Hanan itself is only a Chumrah, it's a Chumrah anyhow, so to be machmir on that for this kind of a case, but this is also machlokes rishonim, and it's, we don't see it, so then I'm not going to Hanan for it, okay? In group ones, they ignore the fact that the steam might have been traded. Okay, in deciding whether something's group one, they don't say, oh, well, maybe this, it's made with steam, and maybe the steam was, the company was using something else. There's extra stuff because we don't even know what the company was doing. Okay, they don't ignore those. But the most famous, or a famous way of being makel is Rebelski's 10% rule. Okay, and that is like this. He says like this. The din is,
and of course, it's going to be with steam systems. Even if it be water, it'll be the same thing, right?
The 10% rule?
Yeah.
Yes, but to get to steam systems, that's mostly get to steam systems.
Everything you're saying doesn't adopt steam.
No, I said at the very beginning, maybe I said too quickly. I'm talking today about steam because that's the most part of this question, but for water is the same kind of shadow.
Like in a HTSD pasteurizer.
Correct. Yes, correct. You see this? You see this? Is there anything? He's in the way. Okay, so, and that's like this. Robustly like this. He said, we're saying that time transfers through to the other side. Okay, we're assuming that time is transferring onto the other side of through the walls into the steam system, or as we're going to talk about in a second, into the water. That means is that the time that's going through is not Bata B'Shishim. Bata B'Shishim is 1.6%. Okay, if it's more than 1.6%, we don't taste it. Somehow we're saying that it's there anyhow, even though we don't taste it. So it's more than 1.6%. How much time is it? They didn't tell us how much it is. We don't know how much the time is. It's something more than 1.6%, but how much is we don't know. So now there's another din, which is that stam yain is Bata B'Shisha. If it's just 6 times, that's 16.6%. If it's B'Shisha, then it's not because it doesn't have time. No, it's not because it doesn't have. It's still taka tastes like wine, but it doesn't have what we call the tzura of wine. It doesn't have the body and the shape and the look of a cup of wine. It's watered down. It's just flavored water rather than watered down wine. Okay? So he says we don't have anything that tells us we have to assume that the blia that goes through is that much. He says, and if it was that much, if it was so much that it would have the tzura of wine, he says it would be impossible to miss it. We could think that we're missing tam of tam. The tam is 1.6%. Now somehow our palate is not delicate enough to notice it. Really there's tam, but we're missing it. He says, but to think that it would be so strong that it would be noticeable and it would be look like wine, it would seem like a cup of wine. He says we don't have to think that we would miss that. There's no reason to think that we would be missing something so strong then. He says, so he tells us. So now we have our goalposts over here. We have tam is more than 1.6%, but the tam is not more than 16.6%. Okay, it's somewhere between those two numbers. So he decided that it leaned more close to the 1.6%. So he says it's only 10% goes through. Okay, the tam is only 10%. Okay, this is 10% rule, and you'll see in a second why that's very significant. Okay, why we care if it's 10%? 10% is also trade. So that's a jump that he made. He said it's not 16%, 60%. That's one step. And the second step is, and therefore it's not 10%. It is 10. It's less than 10%. Okay. So he said like this. So in a case like you see on the screen now, what happens if we have not steam heating up the kettle itself, but steam heats hot water, and then the hot water heats up the kettle. Again, steam heats hot water in the heat exchanger, and then that heats up the kettle, like would be normal, like for cooking, pasteurizing milk or something like that. So again, there's a buffer now. So the steam, there's a in between, something in between the steam and the hot water. So it must go like this. He said, so now the condensate coming back from the treif kettle is only 10% not kosher. Because I just told you, it's only 10% not kosher. So that water that's coming back from the non-kosher kettle is only 10% not kosher, which would be, in theory, batel b'shisha. He says, and now when the tam chances from that water into the water in the heat exchanger that's going to go back to the boiler, now it's only 10% of that. It's only 10% of the original 10%, so now it's only 1%, and now it's batel b'shishim. Okay, so that's really convenient, because now it's batel b'shishim. And from there, he came up with this rule that if there's a buffer in between the treif kettle and the boiler, I mean, not just that the condensate goes right back, but it goes and heats something else that goes back to the boiler, then we don't have to worry about it, and the tam is batel. Okay. Now, so the simplest case is this case of a buffer, and there are other cases of it, which would be what happens are things that don't need batel b'shishim, like bishul hakam is batel b'roiv. So in bishul hakam, you wouldn't worry about the same system altogether. What happens if it's stam yayin? It's batel b'shisha. You don't have to worry about the same system altogether, because anybody that's going into the water is going to be either batel b'roiv or batel b'shisha for sure, because it's not only 10% across, and therefore it's all those cases we're not going to have to worry about the content. So now, when Ezra Schwartz about this many years ago, and he said, different words, he said the tam that goes through is a tam kolosh. Okay, instead of calling it 10%, he says it's a tam kolosh. So to think that the tam kolosh passes to the next thing, that we don't have to worry about. Okay, that was his way of looking at it. Or things that are easy to be batel, he says a tam kolosh, don't have to worry about it. And tam kolosh is really reflective of what we're saying, which is we don't taste anything. So we're being accepting of the din and saying, okay, there's tam, but it's obviously not a strong tam, so he called that tam kolosh. Rees was in between. He said, you know what, I'll buy the first step of Rebelski, not the second step. I'll buy the first step, which is it's not 16%. But then the 10% is just a conjecture. Just to go from to say 16 bit Rashisha, we see where he got that from. But to then say it's 10% was just a conjecture. He wasn't willing to buy that, so he would say for Stanyayin he'd be makel, but not be makel for this having a loop in between. That wasn't good enough for him. Okay, Rav Shachter said, you know, I don't know about this 10%. He said this is all very theoretical, and he's making all kinds of ideas. Rav Shachter said, but so we have to tell you something. He says we all know that there's no time going through that. So if anybody has a good excuse for why we should not be choshesh, I'm willing to go for it. So if you want to tell me I have a loop in between, fine, call what you want to. He says because
the Wild West of it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because this is all coming from the fact that no one sees any tam. That's what's really going on here. We have a din in Shulchan Aruch telling us yes, there's tam, and we all stand there and say tam. Whoever sees any tam over here, that's the problem we have over here. Okay, so. Okay, so that's where we stand here. So now before I finish for today, I'm going to get to my third question. And the third question was, is there anything we could do about this what I call contamination, about these Blios transfer? Okay, so it turns out that there are 7 things you could do about this to avoid the problem. Okay?
Seriously accepts none of them.
No, I didn't say that.
I'm saying that.
You
No,
know,
that's been my experience.
no, there's 7. You're not going to say all 7. No. You don't have enough confidence in me. Okay, 7. The first is, you could be a case where there's no condensate return. Okay, so, okay, I have to get 7 reasons. Okay,
There's no steam system.
no. I didn't think of that one. Okay. It could be, in other words, you could make, either it could be naturally, or you could force them to say, don't return the condensate. We have a place, one company we give hashgacha to, in the same campus, they have one boiler that cooks meat and that cooks eggs. Okay, so the condensate from the meat part of the meat factory is not returned. Okay, we block it off, and the mashgiach keeps an eye on it to make sure that that condensate never comes back. Okay, so the steam is only cooking eggs; it's cooking both, but there's no condensation coming back. Okay, that's one way.
We don't consider the connection via the steam.
Right, that's correct. That's a different question. Not for today. Right, we don't consider connection. For today, I'll tell you, it's because it's invisible what's in between. But there's better reasons. Okay, the second thing is, we could flush the condensate, which is to say is, we know that we're going to be making kosher food in this place in a few days from now. Right now it's treif. The condensate is going to return. So in a few days from now we're going to be making kosher. So we are going to flush all the condensate out of the system. So it's hard to drain a boiler. We talked about this once. It's hard. I'm sorry, no, we didn't talk about it. I'm going to talk about it one time coming. Excuse me. It's hard to drain a boiler and get rid of all the treif water at one shot. Just boiler-wise, it doesn't work well. But you could flush it, which is to say is, for a certain amount of days beforehand, you don't let any steam, any condensate go back to the boiler. And in fact, if all this condensate just goes onto the floor, then new water has to keep coming in. And eventually, you flush out all the treif water. Okay?
And this is without, you have to say,
without chanan.
confidence without chanan.
Yes, that's right. That's one of the reasons why we don't say chanan. But one day, it's coming. We're going to talk about boilers, and then I'll explain to you how that works. And I'm not giving you the cheshbon today, but it's usually a couple of days. Okay? Yes, no chanan. Okay, another way we could do it is what I just told you, which is you could use the buffer. Okay, if you hold this 10% rule and you could do a buffer, if there's a water loop in between the steam system and the kettle, then it's another way you can avoid the problem. You can avoid the problem of the steam becoming treif. The water would still be treif, but the water loop is for that one kettle. You have the treif kettle with its water loop, so that water loop is treif. The other parts of the factory are good. They're still okay.
So Reese would agree with, if you have another level, then
right, if you have a third loop, yes, we have a third stage. But that's not common. That's pretty common. Water loop is reason it happens.
But very common. Very common. And dairy with a pasteurizer, you got to go for 4 or 5 walls till you get the treif going back and then back into the kosher. It's
So I didn't talk about that part. Put that on the side. I did not talk about that. That's really okay. I'll tell you that afterwards. Okay. Number 4, I connected to the 10% rule is that by specific Yisurim, like by Stam Yain or Bishul Akum, where the whole Isser is only is bought the Baroiv or bought the Beshisha, then even with one transfer, I told you don't have to worry about the Chametz Travel Pesach according to some. Okay, that's another one. Okay, another example. Some heat exchangers, some companies have double-walled heat exchangers, which is to say they're so afraid of leaks, of food leaking from, something leaking from the water into the steam, from the product between them, that they have a double wall. That every plate is a double plate, and in case there would be a leak in one of the plates, it wouldn't transfer it to the other side. It would fall into this empty space in between. So if that happens, if you have a double heat exchanger, it's not very common. But if you have that, then it's just kettles touching each other. Then there's no blia between the two. Let's say between the food and the steam.
It's empty space.
Yeah, there are two plates touching each other.
Heat transfer.
In other words, the plates, the food is here and the steam is here, and there's 2 plates between them. So it's not as efficient.
So the heat is transferring just by touching?
Just by touching, right? But there's an empty space, which is if in case there's be a leak, the liquid would fall down in the middle. It wouldn't hit to the other side. It wouldn't get across the other one. Okay? It's not so common. No, it's not very common at all. But there are people who are like that. There's such a thing. Okay? And so then there's no bleed because it's just kettles touching each other. Okay? And similar to that is, in some jackets, instead of the steam being in the jacket, there are steam coils in the jacket. So the jacket is really, instead of being filled with steam, there are coils actually running through the jacket, and the steam is in those coils. So again, it's just kettles touching each other. The outside of that coil is touching the other side of the wall, so there's no bleed between them. And the very last one is pigima. Okay, there's ways potentially to make the steam be pugum. Say that steam has a tom in it that's not good, and that prevents bleeds from transferring. Bleed can't transfer this pigima. And that is not for today. That will be on Mitzvah next time. We'll talk about exactly if and how you could do pigima, which is a common people try to do. How do none of these 6 eights work for me. I need to do something to allow them to use kosher and treif in the same place, in the same steep system, and they want to be pugim it. That will be Mitzvah for next time.